Howdy, folks. Tony Rosales here, joined again by Kevin Leatherborough, and this is the Undercurrent. We have another story for you, or another interview with another community member here in Great Falls or in Cascade County, Montana. Jason is someone who acknowledges his mistakes, and that'll definitely come through in these interviews. But at the same time, he also believes in accountability and justice. So I think he mentions this a couple of times, but he's someone who loves his country. I mean, he was a veteran or served in the military before he became disabled.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't hate the government, the states, police officers, law enforcement. He just wants them to be held accountable and to be able to provide the justice that we sort of value here in the United States. And I think his issues really come down to a repeated pattern of issues with the law enforcement that he's dealt with, despite his own mistakes in the past, which we'll get into. But I think his story really just demonstrates for one, a game of telephone and how that could impact someone's life, how small interactions with law enforcement or the justice system can have long time impacts for people, even for very minuscule issues. And I think that's really what comes to light in this story. Kevin, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's a tale that we've all been told before. You do the job the best that you can. Like you said, he's not against law enforcement by far, and to make a point, none of us are in so many ways. And that we expect those things to be put down correctly when they are spoken in word or in reports or things, because words matter. And this is a perfect case of words matter. And if we don't get the correct words and that done, we can be ruining lives, and it shows here. And I think we've seen it in other cases as well, where we have to make sure that documentation and they're held accountable for that type of behavior or their lack thereof thoroughness when they're doing these sending these messages out to other law enforcement, I think. So
yeah, and I think and we'll definitely get into it in the actual interview, but I think a lot of what Kevin and I are alluding to is an incident that happened earlier on. I think this was like 2019 or so, where law enforcement was coming to Jason's apartment to check on him, but they didn't announce themselves. So they were just knocking on his door. And at that point, Jason ended up calling dispatch to see, for one, if he needed to get law enforcement there, or two, to check if it was law enforcement.
Right.
And like most people in Montana, if someone is knocking on your door, not announcing themselves, of course you're probably going to feel a little threatened. And there's most people in Montana have firearms, and a phrase from Jason ended up being captured by dispatch, and those notes ended up carrying through to several other incidences through these last couple of years, which sort of reminds me a little bit about when we were covering Mike Hansen's case. And I remember being in that inquest where they kept describing Mike and Pam with very, very descriptive language, but not really providing any
soundproof
to that. Yeah, exactly. Which makes me wonder about, or what I thought about when Jason was talking to us, like,
me too.
How much of our law enforcement are they just acting because they've read something in particular in a file, and that biases their entire other interactions and engagements?
Yes.
Even for something that is just simple as a note from dispatch.
Yeah, they can get out of control really quick. And and then you got to sit there and explain the next time you have an interaction. No, that wasn't, And again, we'll let him tell his story. This is something that we have heard before, and so when we got to talk to him, it was, again, very enlightening. He was very honest with us, at the best of the abilities that we could tell, he was right on par, and he knew what he was speaking of. And
Yeah.
for a retired, vet, and that needs to be heard.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly what we're trying to do here with the Undercurrent is give voices to those who haven't been able to share their stories like they want to. So we'll let Jason tell you his story in his own words. So please enjoy this interview.
Enjoy it.
Own little welcome, Jason. Thanks for joining us today. I guess before we get into your story and your experiences here in Great Falls, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
So my name's Jason Martin. I am going to be 42 this summer. I'm a disabled veteran on the autism spectrum, and I have had numerous dealings with law enforcement since I've been in Montana specifically. I've lived in Montana now for about 20 years. I moved to a small town in Montana shortly after I got out of the Marine Corps. I was 22 years old. I moved to Hanover. And unbeknownst to me, I was going to have a long, adverse, essentially career of dealing with law enforcement and the Department of Justice in Montana. So getting into that, my first serious encounter with law enforcement and the criminal justice system happened in 2012, I believe. I went out to a bar in Havre, Montana called the Golden Spike to go drink some beer. However, I wasn't feeling very good, so I hadn't drank anything yet that night. I actually took some beer with me to the bar, and I had it with me in my jacket. So while I was in the bar, the bouncer there, an assistant football coach at MSU Northern, a school that I was attending at the time, I was a civil engineering student. He had approached me and said, "Hey, you're not allowed in the bar. We've had problems with you in the past, and we don't want you in here." And I was puzzled by that. I was like, "Well, the owners don't have like an 86 list." And he's like, "Well, no, you have to get out of here." So, I put up some opposition about wanting to leave, and he grabbed me and threw me into a side exit door. And when I was stumbling back, when I regained my footing, I threw the can of beer that I was holding at him, and I hit him in his cheek. And then I proceeded to run away. A bunch of people ran after me, and I went home. I didn't think anything of the incident. And then approximately like 9 months later, I was going to sit in the Haverhill County Jail. I was going to go sit out some fines for some traffic violations that I had. And when I went up there to sit out the fines, the sheriffs served me with an assault with a weapon charge. And, so then I, had gotten charged with assault with a weapon for that beer can incident in 2012.
So that was you didn't actually get served until what'd you say, like nine months later?
Yeah, it was 9 months later. Yeah, it was like 9 months later. Yeah.
So nobody came to investigate this allegation. Nobody heard your side of the story. They just throw this charge on you because you were coming in to do clean up some
and
other charges.
I actually was pending another matter out of a federal court, and my parents had just paid like $400 for me to go see them, and I got approved by the federal government to go see my family before I addressed this pending federal matter. And so, had I known that I was going to be, served with a state felony warrant while serving out fines, I would have told my parents, like, "Hey, don't buy a plane ticket," So I had already had this trip scheduled to go see my family because I knew that I had a pending legal matter with the federal government, and I might not be able to see my family for a little while. So then I go to turn myself in to serve out a couple of days for these traffic fines, and then the state decides to serve me with a felony warrant for assault with a weapon. So I never ended up going to see my family. They wasted money on a plane ticket. It sucked.
So you had a warrant out for your arrest, and they knew where you lived, and they knew for 9 months where you resided, and nobody came to see you with to fill a warrant if you had one federally.
Uh, the feds ended up doing their part, but the state warrant, I think it had been out for a while, and they just decided to give it to me to surprise me with it. It's funny you mentioned that, because now that I think about it, they probably had numerous opportunities to just come, like, give it to me before that, but it was probably just convenient to have me come to the jail to, like, serve a couple days, and then surprise. It was kind of a bogus move, a low blow, if you will. It was bogus. They probably could have just
Well,
arrested me months before that. Taver's a really small town, and the cops knew me there.
Right.
Yeah.
It
If anybody needs to
well,
know,
and
how
you
many,
were,
what's the population in Havre?
10,000.
it's small.
Yeah,
Yeah.
small.
Yeah,
Well, and you were going to school there, weren't you? So
I was an engineering
and
student.
the bouncer or whoever, he knew who you were, right? Or at least had an idea.
Yeah. They tried saying that they just couldn't figure out who I was for a while, and of course, unbeknownst to me, I didn't know that I was being investigated for any of this. I didn't know anything until I got that warrant in the jail. So anyway, that sucked. I had to deal with that, and I ended up again. I was young, naive. I didn't know anything about the law at the time, and again, I had a public pretender, and he essentially scared me into taking a plea deal. He goes, you've been extradited out of federal prison to come here to deal with this matter, and he's like, if you don't plead out to this and you go to trial and you lose, he's like, the state has sought to seek you as a persistent felony offender. And I'm like, what? I don't know anything that what he's talking about. He's like, and if the judge designates you as a persistent felony offender under Montana state law, he's like, by law, he's going to have to statutorily give you a minimum of 5 years in MSP. And I'm listening to this guy talk to me, and I'm like, oh man, I'm screwed. So then he's like, but if you take this plea agreement, it's like a 3-year plea agreement, it's just a 3-year suspended sentence. You'll be on probation. And he's like, you'll have to register as a violent offender. And of course, I'm young and naive, and I don't really understand the ramifications of what I'm getting ready to do. Like, I had no idea what a detriment to my freedom registering as a violent offender would do to my quality of living, and I had to do it for 10 years. So I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll sign the deal. So I signed the plea deal. They, drove me back to the federal institution I was at. And then, I got out of there, and, I ended up, terminating my federal time and rolling over to that state case. And then I was on probation for a couple weeks and didn't do too well doing that. So I got, sent back to an institution, and, around 2019, I terminated the custodial portion of that state felony that I told you guys about, the throwing the beer can incident. And I was homeless for about 3 months. And I finally got my own apartment. This organization here in Great Falls, Volunteers of America, helped me find an apartment downtown. And I was living in the Graham building on the 3rd floor. And of course, I have that registration requirement. So I had to register that address with the local police department. So this is bringing us into this first incident where this note ended up getting put in my my file here in Great Falls about shooting police officers. So anyway, this one day I'm in my apartment, and I haven't been out of institutions very long. I'm disabled. I have panic and anxiety. I just
Before we get into that, do you mind speaking about because you said that you were a disabled vet?
Yes, sir.
Can you speak to that, especially the and what you were just mentioning, the anxiety and all of that? Just because I think it's important to sort of
Okay.
contextualize,
Okay.
I guess your whole self. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been pretty misdiagnosed most of my life. One common theme that I've learned about myself in dealing with my mental health is that I do have a mental health disability. However, it's been mischaracterized a lot. So when I was younger, they said I had like ADHD, and then like when I got out of the Marine Corps in Havre, they said I was schizoaffective, or you're antisocial, major depression, bipolar disorder, and then shortly after getting out of prison in 2019, I started going to counseling. I've been in and out of counseling for the majority of my life, and a doctor there, a really good doctor, she diagnosed me as being on the autism spectrum, suffering from PTSD, and having a pretty severe case of panic and anxiety. So for people out there that like don't understand like autism, or people on the autism spectrum, a lot of people think it's like a line where like you have mild autism and severe autism. That's really kind of a misconception. Autism would be more like a wheel with a bunch of colors on it, very, very, very unique to each individual. But one common theme that you'll see with people who are autistic is they have auditory sensitivity and visual sensitivity. Oftentimes they're very logic based. Things are matter of fact, and they have difficulty um, in social settings, and get really bad panic and anxiety in like groups. And that explains me to the T. In fact, I had a lot of those issues when I was in the Marine Corps, and it just got labeled as like I was a problem person, and I just didn't know how to be obedient and how to conform my conduct to the standards of the Marine Corps. And anyway, thankfully for that doctor, she was able to identify that. And because of all the traumatic things that I've had happen in my life, from um, poor upbringing, corporal punishment, being brainwashed in the Baptist church about burning in hell, and then joining the Marine Corps and being like mentally, physically, and verbally abused quite frequently because of my odd nature. And then getting out of the Marine Corps and then moving to Havre, and then, getting into drinking to cope, and then getting in trouble and introduced to the criminal justice system in Montana, and dealing with DOC and prison and all the predatory individuals that you would meet in a prison. Like people like me, unfortunately, I've learned this now. I'm 42. I'm pretty educated in my disability, and I know a lot about the law. People like me, and you guys know this, tend to be targets for predators. And so like when I was in prison, and I was in the Marine Corps, or like when I'm in group settings, it's almost like an unconscious human nature, like a wounded bird. I don't know what it is about people. They like to like hone in on people who are different and then like attack them.
Mm.
Well, I've
Do you
suffered
think?
that a lot.
Yeah. Do you think, because you mentioned at the start, especially at this bar in Havre, or the guy who identified you or tried kicking you out, said that you'd been a problem before. Do you think that's all sort of related to what you were just speaking about in some of these social situations, or the anxiety and PTSD? Um, do you think that was part of that initial issue?
Uh, it was a big issue of miscommunication. I'm often alone when I go out in the community, and because of my odd and oppositional demeanor, I get targeted. especially by groups of like women. They're like, you know, oh, that guy's weird, he's creepy, and because I don't have like the best like how to like approach people and talk to them, and a lot of the things that I talk about are kind of like out of left field. People tend to characterize me as weird, off-putting, creepy to women, and so even though I don't have any bad intention and I'm only seeking to like be friendly, I get characterized as a bad person because, you know, in today's day and age, if you're labeled as weird, creepy, or different, people associate, there's a negative connotation with that. Just
Uh-huh.
because someone's, let's say, creepy, weird, or different, that doesn't necessarily mean they're bad or that they have bad intentions. But
Yeah.
people associate those terms with negative character traits. And that's essentially what's happened to me. People have characterized, because I've been characterized as oppositional, weird, creepy, everybody interprets that as he must be a bad person with bad intentions. And so they,
Yeah.
you know, so yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's helpful, and I think that, and to your point, that's I mean, we see that a lot as well in terms of the stuff that we look into or investigate, how they describe individuals, or just how you see an affidavit or court documents read. They end up, a lot of time law enforcement ends up putting descriptors, but not the actual facts that led to how they describe that individual.
Exactly what has happened in my case. And just to quickly piggyback on what you said, you know Miss Polajewski. Have you talked to her? You have in real life. You both have dealt with Miss Polajewski. I've spoken to her as well. And you know what I can tell you? Absolutely 100% that I know, and I don't know exactly what her diagnosis is, but she's has mental health problems. She has significant mental health problems, and those things absolutely played a role in the confrontations she has had with law enforcement. And I don't think those things were properly addressed. But what they did do is they characterized her as non-compliant, combative, and essentially a bad person.
Yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't really, and that's why I think they need to, there needs to be a level of education, especially with that emotional intelligence for law enforcement. But let's get back to your story. So you were this 2019, you terminated, or you got out of prison, and then you found yourself in an apartment in Great Falls, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, can you, because then at some point, law enforcement officers came to check on you. Can you describe that incident?
Yeah, and when we say law enforcement officers came to like do this, the most important aspect about what I'm getting ready to tell you is that it was not known to me at the time that police were coming there to like verify my registration. But being the person that I am and having the disabilities that I do and having that inquisitive nature, I was able to utilize those characteristic traits to find out that it was the police who came to my door. So I was in my apartment, minding my own business. I don't know exactly what I was doing. I might have been in my bed or something, farting around on my computer. And I heard a pounding on my door, and it automatically, it just sent like shivers down me. And I was like, it was just louder than a normal knock. And it's a locked building. So the only person that maybe should be knocking would be like the landlord or a neighbor, but nobody ever knocked on my door like that. And I had been there for a couple months at least, and it just seemed bizarre and odd to me. So I didn't answer the door. In fact, that's just how I am. I'm very private. If somebody does something abrupt or is rude to me, or I just don't respond. And I didn't have a legal duty to say anything, so I just sat there quietly, and then I heard a pound again. I didn't say anything. And then the next thing I know, I see my door handle wiggling and shaking. And like, then I'm thinking, like, dude, is someone trying to break in my apartment? But here's the thing, being the inquisitive and analytic person that I am, I'm like, are you serious? Is there somebody in my community, in my building, that is literally that has that much audacity to literally try to just open my door and come into my apartment. Like, I'm like, this dude must be like super mentally disabled, like more than me. But I was like, you know what? I'm very suspicious about this. And I was like, I wonder, I wonder. Anyway, I was upset after that happened and I called dispatch and I said, hey, some people just like came to my door and were like banging on the door and like grabbing the handle and trying to come in. Like, you know, what's going on? And I don't know if I asked or if she volunteered, but it came up that it was the police and the police were there to verify my registration status. Well, I went off. I was mad and I have yet to get the phone call. I've put in a petition to get the phone call. I've gotten the printout. But I went off. I was mad. I was upset. I said, hey, you allow police to bang on people's doors and not identify themselves and grab on people's door handles. And during that heated
Can you pause there for a moment? So
yes.
why were they there? Can you just, what was the reason why they were there? Is for to make sure that you were registered at the correct address. So were you still considered a violent offender at that time?
Yes, I had to register as a violent offender and I believe they were doing something called a compliance check just to make sure I was actually there, which is a routine practice for both violent offenders and sex offenders. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for clearing that up. Yeah. So you called dispatch and they found, and then you learned that it was law enforcement on the other side. Kind of an audacious move for them to just knock without announcing, try opening your door without announcing. So what? I'm guessing you were still on the or on the phone with dispatch at that moment, right?
Yeah, and I made a comment to the effect, and I'd really like to get the phone call, but I think I got a pretty good memory. I made a comment to the effect of, hey, you know, with the way those police were like pounding on my door and not identifying self, they're lucky I didn't have a firearm and shoot through the door. I said something to that effect. But here's what you got to understand. That comment about me shooting through my door was based on the idea that an intruder, a potential intruder, was trying to break in my apartment. And another primary uh, piece of knowledge at the time was I didn't know who was outside of my apartment and they didn't identify themselves as police.
Hmm.
So it is reasonable to believe, and it's reasonable for a person to say, hey, when they're complaining to dispatch, like, hey, these guys are lucky I didn't have a gun because with the way they were pounding and the way they were trying to open the door handle, it would be reasonable for a person to start putting some holes through their door, thinking, especially if
Right.
it was an older woman, a scared older woman. You know what I'm saying? Like, it really doesn't matter who it
Yeah.
is. If somebody grabs your door handle and starts shaking on it, I don't even think that you have a duty to tell them that you're armed. You could
You
potentially
don't.
just
So
shoot through your door and you would be justified.
Yeah.
right. So I mean, you said that if you had a gun, or at least that's the words that you're thinking that you used
Yes,
with
yes,
the
yes.
dispatch.
That
So did you have a gun in the apartment, or you were unarmed, at least with respect to a firearm?
yeah, I was unarmed. Yeah, I was unarmed.
Okay. So at no
I
point you
legit
actually
I
had a firearm. It
legitimately
was
I
Go ahead.
legitimately had the same thing happen to me. So I had somebody tried to break in. I was not home. My wife was home, and they went to the front door, tried to get in there, went around my house, which she had the right sense to see what was going on. Went back, locked the door. Okay, went back to her room, took cover, and they literally tried to jiggle the handle to get in. I went down to law enforcement to the PD office down here in Great Falls to report the incident. Now, I was on the phone and I wanted to let them know that I was coming down, and I reported the incident and they came and did the thing. The lady that I talked to at the desk, when I described what happened with the door jingling, she said, well, law enforcement does that too. How would you treat
What?
that? No lie.
Well,
I
now
was
listen,
I was
listen.
livid,
To
livid. I was like,
Yes.
somebody just tried to break into my house, okay? And they jiggled the door. And she legitimately said, well, sometimes law enforcement does that too. Are you
Okay.
sure that that's what was happening? And I was like, are you really going to say that to me right now? He's in
What?
jail for 10 years right now. The one that was trying to break in for almost killing somebody by hit and run. And that was, so just want to let you know.
Wow. I will say this. I will say this because I am a proponent of law enforcement, but I'm a proponent of good law enforcement following the law and accountability. I will say this. When she made that comment, for one, she shouldn't have made that statement. But I do know this,
Mm-hmm.
and we can all agree, there are some legitimate times where it's okay for a cop to like grab a door and open it. Like obviously if somebody's at home and they fell down and they're in distress, like that would be grounds to do that. This
But
my
you still announce
situation,
yourself.
You
Yeah.
yeah,
still need to announce yourself.
oh
You
yeah,
still
and
need to announce yourself by
yeah,
law.
announcing yourself, yeah.
Yes, and I agree with you. There certainly is officers out there. I don't know who's training them in their post training, but I'm sure that's not part of it.
No. You
Right.
just said it is very, very, very important for the announcement. Unless, again, there is some very compelling state interest, like you know what I'm saying, where it's a big safety issue. But your
Yeah.
instance and my instance, or like mine, there was no legitimate reason for them not to announce themselves, and there really wasn't any legitimate reason for them to grab the door handle. The only thing that they should have done was knock, and then if I didn't say anything, which I didn't, they should have just been like, "Hey, Great Falls Police Department, Jason, are you home? We're trying to do your registration." They didn't say shit.
Right.
They literally acted like,
How about this? How about they give you a call on the telephone and say,
yeah, they
"Hey,
could have.
we need you to come down," or "Hey, how you doing?" I mean, it's common courtesy to treat our citizens like they're human beings, and
Oh no. You got it wrong with
for some reason, we've
yeah.
lost that.
Well, yeah, not when you're me in my situation and you're a violent offender. You are on the bottom of
Yeah.
the barrel, and they can do whatever they want. And they've proven to me time and time again that I am subhuman. It's not right. But over the last 20 years in
Yeah.
dealing with the police in Havre and Great Falls, I have learned that with my record, I am
Yeah.
subhuman.
Let's because I think we'll kind of get more into some of those as we get further into your story. So, what or during that dispatch call or that instant where law enforcement showed up to verify your registration, anything else happened there other than that conversation that's worth noting to who's watching and listening?
Yeah, so that basically happened. She said, "Well, they still need to verify your registration," and she acted like she was, like, I don't know. I still need to get the phone call. So I calmed down a little bit, and then I went back to my apartment, and there was like a police officer and a detective or somebody, and they were downstairs, and they said, "Hey, we're just here to verify your registration." I was mad. I'm like, "Oh, so you just grab door handles and blah blah," and I was mad at them, and they're like, "We're not going to play this game if you don't, blah blah blah. We'll just arrest you for failure to register." And like they were not very happy that I was confronting them about the manner in which they came to my apartment. But that was essentially the end of that. I didn't hear anything about that. I didn't know that there was even any kind of record of it until until several years later. Now, would you like me to get into that?
Yeah, let's so that was in 2019. So now what year are we talking about now?
So now we're just around 2024. I am
Okay.
here in Great Falls still. I'm out late at night with a girl that I know, and I took her to a house to see a friend. And when we were leaving, I got pulled over for allegedly not having license plate lights. I was pulled over by an officer, patina. Um, and I was a little combative at first because I was irritated about being pulled over. I'm like, "I'm not giving you my license, blah, blah, blah." And so I finally gave him my license, and um, I start having a panic attack. And there was a couple other officers there that I believe there was a female officer there named Um, oh, I can't think of her name. But there's a couple other officers there, and they were pretty calm and helping me stay calm. But I asked them if I could stand outside of my car so I could like breathe some fresh air because I felt like I was trapped in my car. And they're like, "Yeah, that's fine." And as I'm standing there, I can hear dispatch radioing back on Officer Patina's radio. I can hear something warrant out for his arrest, has shot at police officers. And I'm like, whoa, I instantly panicked. I was literally like, a hair away from running. I was panicking so bad, and I was automatically like, hey, I've never done that. I've not shot at police. Like, what are you guys talking about? And the male cop that was standing right there, he goes, hold on, and he went back there and he came back over to me. He goes, no, don't worry. That's not you. They're not talking about you. And so he said, it's just somebody with the same name. That sounded weird as hell to me. I'm like, what? Anyway, I didn't think anything of it, right? I have no reason to think about it. He said that it's not me. It's just somebody with the similar same name. So, I get my tickets. The other female officer, her name was Kishore, Officer Kishore, Stephanie Kishore. So I get in the car, I leave, I end up taking care of the traffic tickets, no big deal. Well, about a month later, I'm with that same girl, the girlfriend of mine, and we're at Town Pump. It was like January 4th or something like that of 2024. And she goes into the gas station to go get a drink. And I go in there too, and I see a native girl in there that I know named Danielle Ironmaker. And Danielle's like, hey, can I get a ride with you guys when you leave? So I'm like, yeah, that's fine. So I leave, I get in my car, and I sit there, and I wait for my friend Jenna in the store. And the girl, Danielle Ironmaker, she got in the car with me too. So a couple minutes later, Jenna comes out of the store. She looks a little disoriented. And I said, are you okay? And she's like, can we go? And she looks like she's about to cry. So I leave. I go to my house, and my spider senses are going off, and I'm like, dude, why are you acting so weird? And she goes, that lady like attacked me. And I'm like, attacked you? Anyway, she's not being very forthcoming. So I know that something has happened between Jenna and an employee in the store, or I suspect that has happened. Well, as I'm in my apartment talking to Jenna, I start seeing cops flying up and down 13th Street, and I start suspecting that it could potentially be related to her, right? So another 5 minutes later, about 10 minutes goes by, and next thing you know, I have like a whole police department of vehicles outside of my apartment, and they're pounding on my door, walking around my apartment, shining lights in my windows. And I'm panicking, and I'm looking over at Jenna, and I was like, I don't know what you did or if this is about you, but you're going to have to get up and go out there and deal with it, because I don't want to be affiliated with whatever you did. And she's like, they attacked me, or like all I did was take a sandwich or something like that. And I'm like, look, you're going to have to go out there and deal with that. Well, there was a crack in my blinds back here, and the police were back there looking through the crack in the blinds, and they were able to identify her. And they said, hey, we can see you in there. You need to come out. And she like drops on her hands and knees and says, well, I just took a sandwich. So I tell her, I say, get up and get out of my apartment right now. Get up. If you don't get up and get out, they're probably, going to get a warrant, and they're going to damage my apartment. At least that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to get a warrant. So she gets up, and she kind of like timidly goes out the door, and I'm right by the door, and I shut the door, and I can hear them say, is Jason in there? So at this point in time, I know that they know who I am, and they know who she is. So
How do you think they knew who you were? I mean, I guess they had your car and apartment. Do you think that's That's
So
how they figured that out, or what were your
the
thoughts?
only reason they were, and I found this out in my discovery after the fact, and then we'll come back to the situation. The reason they were able to identify me was because Officer Keysor, the female that responded to that traffic violation with Officer Patina like 2 weeks prior, it was fresh in her mind. So she recognized the car, me, and the girl.
Mm-hmm.
And since she was one of the officers that responded to the incident at the gas station, when she looked at their surveillance footage, she saw me, my car, and that girl. So they automatically, it was honestly, if I never would have got that traffic stop 2 weeks prior, nothing probably ever would have come of the incident that I'm talking about now. So anyway, they're like, Jason, tell him to come out here. And I'm standing there scared. And I know in my mind, I'm like, they don't really have any probable cause that I've done anything yet. And if they do want to seize me, they're going to have to get a warrant because I'm in my home now. So um, I'm standing there and I'm afraid they're going to kick the door open. And they were making statements and pounding on my door. And I was starting to believe that they were going to damage my property. So I cracked the door open and I said, why do you guys need to speak with me? You already got hurt. And they backed away from my door and they said, can you just come out here for a minute? They looked like, they just looked like dirty. I don't know how to describe it. Like, like a predator trying to lure a kid into like a van to like get some candy. Like that's how they were. They were standing out and they were all nice and bright-eyed. They're like, "Can you just step outside so we can talk to you?" And I knew the reason they
Giving you a
wanted me
false
to.
sense of security.
Yes, they wanted me to step outside of my apartment because they have to have a warrant to come into my apartment, right? So if I stepped out of my apartment, they could grab me and detain me and they wouldn't have to worry about that. That's the only reason. I said, well, why do you need me to come out there? Anyway, one of the officers said, well, you need to come out here right now. And he stepped onto my porch and I backed away and I was going to like shut my door. And he goes, if you shut that door, I'm going to kick it open. And like I pulled it open a little bit, but I was still in my house. And I said, why do you guys need to talk to me? I kind of like leaned my head forward. And then he reached into my apartment, grabbed me by my sweater, pulled me out of my apartment. And then like 4 other cops, including that officer, Stephanie Kiesler, grabbed me. And then this start saying over and over, stop resisting, stop resisting, stop resisting. And I wasn't resisting. Like as they're saying, stop resisting, my hands are already like behind my back. And so then I don't talk. I'm like, am I being detained right now? And they're like, yeah, you are. And I was like, okay, what am I being detained for? Well, they didn't know what I was being detained for yet. They made me sit there for about 5 minutes while they figured out exactly what they were going to do. But I do know what they were doing is they were doing what's called bootstrapping. They got a hold of me because they wanted to arrest me and they didn't know exactly what they were going to arrest me for. So they were waiting to doctor up their probable cause, bootstrap probable cause. And when they finally said what I was arrested for, they said, you're going to be arrested for burglary, accountability to burglary. And I was like, what? And then as I was going to the cop car, I said, well, can you explain that to me? And he goes, actually, it's robbery. You're going to be arrested for accountability to robbery. And I was like, again, I'm puzzled. I'm like, all right, can you explain that to me a little bit? He goes, well, the girl that you were with was stealing items from the store and she assaulted employees on her way out. And so because she used force, because she assaulted an employee, that escalated the theft to robbery. Anytime you use force in the commission of a theft, it's robbery. Right. So as
So
I'm
the
rolling,
accountability portion comes from it because they're assuming that you were
the getaway
involved
driver.
in. Yeah. Yep.
So, as I'm listening to him tell me this, I'm like, this is such bullshit. Like the girl didn't even have anything. She had no stolen items. She looked like she got beat up. Like when I was looking at her, her lip, like when we got to the apartment, like her lip was like swollen up and she wasn't being very forthcoming with what happened. So in my mind, it looked like the employees roughed her up. Anyway,
Hmm.
I get taken to jail and I get my discovery, and I find out, like apparently she took a sandwich that she didn't have, and I'm looking through my.
Was that it? Was that really just it? I mean, obviously the
It was
altercation is
it
part of it
it
too,
was a
but it was
sandwich,
all over a
literally.
sandwich.
It
Okay.
was Yes, it was a sandwich that she didn't even get. It was a sandwich. Anyway, and honestly, we're laughing about it because of how ridiculous it is. And here in a minute, when I get to her portion of the case where she got sentenced, you'll see how ridiculous it is. But when I got my discovery, I was reading through like the officer narratives, and I noticed that the officer, in order to justify circumventing the warrant requirement and pulling out of my apartment, guess what he cites to? He says that this person has a history of threatening to shoot law enforcement. And I was like, what? And so the first thing that comes over in my mind was that that um that call that I heard from dispatch on the traffic violation. I was like, you know what? I heard something about that. So um and again, I still at this point do not know that there's like a note in my file. So I don't know if it was um I think it was right around that time that I read that discovery that I called Great Falls Police Department and I asked them about different notes in my file, and they did locate a note, and I think they read it to me. They said, during your verification for registration, this, he said that if he had a gun he would shoot law enforcement. And I'm like, what? That's not the whole conversation. Like that's cherry picking, a few choice phrases from a 15-minute phone call from a guy who thought he was being robbed. So that's, this is like the second time now that this idea about shooting the police has come up, and I'm like, this is an outright like lie. So that rest in this case where that cop pulled me out of my apartment, later on down the road, if I file a lawsuit for violation of my Fourth Amendment right for an illegal arrest, you know what they're going to do? They're going to say, you have a history of threatening law enforcement, therefore that officer was justified in circumventing the warrant requirement because that's an exigent circumstance because you're a dangerous felon. But that whole statement that he's referencing to is a lie. So that was the
Well,
second
and it
time.
also seems like that was, and what we'll find out in this other um, third time as well. But it sounds like they used that to backtrack, or to, like, they didn't know about that note in your file until after you were detained and arrested. Correct?
I'm not 100% sure, but
Okay.
I do believe that when that officer was going to write that narrative, I think he may have come to that conclusion after the fact. I was like, oh, I
Hmm.
better put this in my statement so I can justify, grabbing this guy out of his apartment. So I
Yeah,
agree with
right.
you. I think he may have come to that conclusion after the fact. So
Okay.
that was that case, right? So I end up finding a case in Montana where, if you don't know what the person's doing, like, and you're like in a car or something, like that person's intent on committing a crime doesn't transfer to you. So Montana doesn't have the doctrine of transferred intent. So when I told my lawyer about that case, and I got an affidavit from Danielle Ironmaker stating the native girl that I gave a ride to, me and her didn't know, we couldn't see what was happening in the gas station. And, we didn't care what was going on in there. We didn't have any reason to believe that the other person that I took there was stealing or getting into a fight with employees. So she signed an affidavit. I gave it to my lawyer. And my lawyer, ended up contacting me and saying, "Hey, I have good news. The prosecution would like to know if you would agree to a DPA, a 1-year DPA." It's pretty unheard of. It means that the case was bullshit. So it basically was an agreement where I would admit that they had probable cause to charge me, and that I have to be good for a year, pay $250 to the animal shelter, and they'll dismiss the case right away. So they did, and I got the motion to dismiss the charge by the prosecutor. And right in the motion, the prosecutor says, based on the knowing element, the prosecution does not believe that they would be able to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt, because the prosecution does not believe, based on the witnesses available, that the knowing element could be met. All right. So that took care of it for me, right? So
And
Jenna's
we just passed that, what, like that 1 year time frame,
yeah.
or
So
probably
then
earlier this year. Yeah. Okay.
fast forward, I've talked to Jenna and I said, have you gotten your case taken care of? So, she had a public pretender and he convinced her to plead guilty, and the state would drop her robbery charge down to criminal endangerment. And if she would agree to like 5-year DOC commitment, she'd have to plead guilty to a felony. So in my mind, I'm like, that's serious. This girl's never been in trouble before. And I didn't think it was a good deal. I'm like, you should take this to trial. Because when I got my discovery of the video, I saw what she did in the gas station, and it just looked like a blooper. There wasn't no like outright assault by her. It just looked like a bunch of like, they looked like two sumo wrestlers like wrestling with each other. And the
So,
other,
I mean, it could have very well been that someone was blocking her path and she
they
was just.
were, I'm glad you said that. You just took the thought right out of my mind. An employee stepped in front of the door. Now check this out. State law says that employees can do that, but individual private business policies don't. So
Mhm.
although that female employee was within her rights to step in front of the door under state law, Town Pump doesn't have that kind of policy. They're not supposed to do that. So she
Yeah.
basically
And I
violated
think that's
company.
happened a couple of other. Yeah,
Yeah.
to your point, I think that's been like the instance in a couple of other places here in Great Falls too, where kids or whoever end up trying to take some things from Albertsons or Walmart, and policy-wise, they're not supposed to do anything. Just let them go.
Yeah, it's called temporary detention by merchant, but it's supposed to be like on reasonable grounds, and they're supposed to use reasonable force. I mean, they were like, Jenna was trying to like push the lady out of the way to get out of the store, and then another employee came up and grabbed her, and then she's like rolling between his legs. It was a shit show. And they're trying to make it seem like, she knocked somebody
Interesting.
out to steal a sandwich, and it was stupid. So get this, Jenna goes to court, changes her plea, agrees to the 5-year DOC, and when the judge is sentencing her, he looks over at the prosecution and he goes, I'm not going with the plea agreement, the sentence recommendation. He goes, this case was like taking a nuclear bomb to a field mouse. You know what he did? He downwardly departed. He gave her a 1-year deferred sentence, meaning like in 6 months, as long as she doesn't get in trouble, like in November, the case is going to be dismissed, and just like me, she's not going to have a felony on her record. So right there, that tells you the severity and seriousness of this case. And he even said something. He goes, dude, this case is about a sandwich. So even the judge, and the judges in this county oftentimes are known to be pretty punitive. And Judge
Yeah, Roger.
Kitzman was like, no. And very rarely, I'm telling you right now, very rarely do you see a district judge in Cascade County downwardly depart from a recommended sentence in a plea agreement. If
Yeah.
anything, they're hard pressed to abide by the plea agreement because they typically want to give the person more time.
Interesting.
So that tells you how dumb that case was. But at the time when the situation and the events were unfolding, they were treating me like I just robbed a bank, and like, yeah, they were treating me like they were in hot pursuit of a bank robber who had just shot somebody.
No,
That's literally
Bonnie
how
and
they
Clyde.
treated.
Yeah.
If I would have made even the slightest wrong move, like in my apartment they would have killed me. I know it. They would have shot me. They would have done something to hurt me really bad.
Yeah.
So that was that.
So yeah. So and that one. So both of you are all cases have been dismissed. You're no longer, because what? That's been a little bit over a year and a half now from that instance.
Yeah, Jenna still has about what is it right now? It's July, August, September, October, November.
So
Jenna
a couple more months
as
of
long as she
deferred.
doesn't screw up and do something else stupid, her case is going to be
Okay.
dismissed and she'll be done. And
Should have been
Good.
this. It should have been. Sounds like it should have been dismissed
well, she's
instead of the plea.
she is struggles. She's got mental health problems, and she's the big issue. Like a lot of the people that I know in the community, and I associate with a lot of them because I was homeless and I was in prison. A lot of the people that I was locked up with or that I was homeless with, they have severe substance abuse issues. And so, like Jenna, you know, I love Jenna to death. She's a good girl, but she has some issues with substance abuse, and most of the troubles that I see people get into in the system here in Montana and just like around the country are oftentimes related to substance abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if she wasn't engaged with, if she didn't have the substance issues, that incident at the gas station wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, that's probably true. Now, and one thing to also mention, and this is true for both of you guys, like, and this probably doesn't help with recovery or anything related to just trying to live life, is, I mean, despite these cases being dismissed, you've still had to spend your own money and time and energy into these cases, right?
I do. I had a pretty good lawyer, but I'll tell you, I had to argue with him about the law. And I had to independently like go hunt this girl down, Danielle Ironmaker, to, you know, have her sign this affidavit. So if I had not studied the law and if I wasn't proactive with my case, I don't
Mm.
I don't believe that my case would have been resolved in the manner that it was. You know, especially with my record that
Yeah.
they probably would have brought up. Oh, this guy's dangerous, blah blah blah. If I had a, you know, I could have seen my lawyer saying, "Oh, yeah, no, you better just take this 7-year DOC deal. Otherwise, it's robbery. You're gonna get 40 years in prison." And with your record, you know what I'm saying? They would have comfortably walked me right into the slaughter like they've done in the past. So, um, had I not been proactive about my case and had I not known the law like I did, I don't think that I would have gotten the outcome that I did. And it could have played out worse for Jenna as well.
Yeah. This is something they need to teach in school, is how to study the law yourself and how to help advocate for yourself. Even not I mean, I know the recommendation is not to be your or not to represent yourself, but I mean, to your point, you've been able to push against your lawyer and advocate for yourself, which I think that's something that everyone should learn how to do, especially.
Everyone, yeah, anybody, any person I don't care if a person's guilty as sin. And I'm telling you right now, more than 90% of the people in jail and they're guilty. It doesn't matter. They should still study the law and advocate for themselves. You can take responsibility for wrongdoing and advocate for yourself as well. Like,
Yeah.
it's just
Truth.
you know, you're
true.
doing yourself a
Okay.
disservice. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to this third and more recent incident. Because so when did this happen, this year or at the end of 2024?
So here we are, you know, about a year later from that incident with the gas station. Literally about a year later, I am in the mall in it was December 15th of last year, and I went to Zoomies to go look around. I don't go to Zoomies very often, but I do like to go in there and just look at things. And I immediately noticed a longboard with big wheels on it. So I went over to it, I picked it up, I stood on it, and a male employee came over there and told me, you know, you can't stand on the longboard. I was a little irritated. I'm like, well, you know, if somebody wants to buy a longboard, like, how are they supposed to know if it's like a good, you know, fit for them? I wasn't riding it. I just stood on it and like leaned back and forth on it. And anyway, I put the longboard back, and you know, he was kind of dismissive of my comment. He goes, well, I don't know, dude. He goes, you just have to buy the longboard. And I'm like, all right. So anyway, I was irritated, and I'm like, I don't want to buy anything from this store. These employees suck. But I didn't say that. So as I'm leaving the store, I make a comment, and off the cuff comment. I say, you know what? I don't think I want to buy anything from this store. Just like that. The way that I'm saying to, just like that. Well, the male employee was standing behind me and he goes, well, we don't want you in here anyway. Every time you come in here, you cause a problem. And I turned around and I was already irritated. I said, excuse me? He goes, yeah, every time you come into the store, you cause a problem. I said, one, I don't know who you are. And two, I can't even remember the last time that I came in this store. And I said, you know what? I think I need to talk to a manager. So I marched my way over to the cash register and I start like in kind of an irritated tone. I'm like frantic a little bit. I'm upset. And I'm like, you let employees talk like that to the, potential customers. So I calm down a little bit and I start trying to tell this female employee that I have a documented disability that makes it hard for me to like deal with situations like that. And she goes, you're not being asked to leave because of your disability. You're being asked to leave because you were told to get off the skateboard 3 times. And I said, I only heard him tell me to get off the skateboard 1 time. And it was apparent that she wasn't going to be reasonable with me. So I was like, whatever. And as I turned to leave the store, the security guard had come and was standing outside of the store listening to the male employee tell him whatever he was telling him. So, I'm like, I'll just talk to the security guard and take up my claim with him. And so I walk up to the security guard and the male employee comes inside and I'm upset and I'm talking to the security guard. And I'm like, it's free country. I have a right to free speech. I can say whatever the fuck I want to say. So I had made that comment a couple times. And the purpose in me making that comment about I can say whatever the fuck I want to say was in relationship to the comment when I said I didn't want to buy anything from the store, because that's essentially what irritated the male employee and the telling me, well, get out of here. We don't want you in here anyway. And the security guard's like, you need to calm down. There's people in the store like looking at you. And I look around and like there wasn't anybody in the mall. It was just like me and the
Well, it's the
security
mall,
guard.
the Great Falls Mall, right? So
No,
not many
like
people go to the Great Falls Mall in
there
the
really
first place.
wasn't. There really wasn't. He said there's kids in here. And I looked around and there was nobody. And I said, and I was still irritated. And I'm like, dude, I said, hey, I'm having a conversation with you. And I was being a little smart assy, but I was like upset. I'm like trying to calm myself down, at the same time trying to advocate for myself and talk about my constitutional rights. And I know that there's like a fine line when you're using profanity because there's a thing called fighting words. But I told him, I said, hey, if I'm having like an A and B conversation with me and you, I can say whatever the fuck I want to say. I said, I'm not swearing at you. I'm just saying this situation's fucking bullshit. And he's like, well, you need to calm down and blah, blah, blah. And then I told him, I said, look, dude, I have a disability. Just like, bear with me. Let me just ventilate for a minute. He goes, well, I'm autistic too, and I don't act like you. And I said, hey, my disability symptoms don't have to manifest themselves in the same way yours do to validate my condition. And he said, look, I'm just trying to de-escalate the situation. As soon as he said the word de-escalate, it automatically like calmed me down. And I said, all right, I think I'm going to leave. So I walked away and I got over by like Famous Footwear. And like I turned around and I noticed the male employee was outside of Zoomies and he had a phone to his ear, and it like automatically like started making me panic again. So I walked back by Zoomies and I looked over at him and I was like, why are you spying on me? And he like turned away all like, you know, you know, uh, covertly with the phone and like walked back into the store. And I was like, that's weird, man. So I'm like, I need to get out of here. All right. I feel like these people are like conspiring against me. So I like, walk very briskly over towards the elevators by Shields. And I take the elevator up into JCPenney. And as I'm walking out of JCPenney, I notice a police officer coming into JCPenney. And I automatically panicked and I was like, I wasn't 100% sure they were there for me, but I didn't want to find out. And I didn't have a legal duty to stand there and wait for them to come talk to me if they were looking for me. So I turn around and I walk the opposite direction from the cop and I hear a voice say, hey. As soon as I heard that voice say, hey, I sprinted around the stand that I was at and ran through the entrance of JCPenney. There was another police officer in the entryway of JCPenney. He just watched me run by, and then there was another police officer that was close to the entrance of the mall, and like I don't know, I did like this evasive like step movement, and I got around him barely. He like grabbed onto my jacket, and I was able to like pull away, and I get outside in the parking lot, and I run in between the first row of parked cars. And I'm older, dude. Like I'm 42. Like I'm not in the greatest shape, and like I was winded. So the only reason I kept running is because I was being chased, and I knew if I stopped running, these cops are going to tackle me and they're going to hurt me. At least if I can keep a little bit of a lead from them, I could potentially stop and say, hey, I give up. Don't hurt me. Like, I'll get down on the ground. Just don't hurt me. Right. So I get in between the parked cars, and I turn, and I'm right next to an SUV, and I know there's a cop behind me, and I go to put my hands up to say, hey, don't hurt me, which I had already said one time before. I had said, don't hurt me. And before I could get the words out of my mouth to the officer to like, hey, like, I'm stopping, I'm giving up, like, don't hurt me, I was on the ground, and I thought I got shot because I couldn't breathe. And then about 2 or 3 seconds, I could tell that I was getting tased. And then I looked over, and guess who tased me? The same officer that pulled me over for that traffic stop a year prior to that, the officer Patina. So, he's sitting there with me on the ground, and one of the taser prongs had gone so far right here into my forearm, he couldn't pull it out of my arm. And like, he's like sitting there yanking at it, and it won't come out. And he's like, man, this won't come out. So he finally like rips it out of my arm, and my arm's literally like, oh yeah, that spot on my arm, it didn't stop bleeding for like 5-6 hours. That taser prong had nicked some kind of like blood vessel in there, and it just wouldn't like coagulate. It just kept bleeding over and over. I had to keep getting like tissue at the jail. Like, it finally stopped bleeding at about like 10 o'clock at night, and this incident happened at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So while I'm on the ground, my head split open, I'm bleeding, I got cuts all over my hand, and I'm kind of like in shock, like trying to catch my breath, as you could imagine. And one of the other officers that was chasing me ran up, and he looked over at Patina, or he looked at me first, and he goes, why did you run? He goes, you weren't even being charged with anything. And I'm like, trying to process all of this. And then I remember him looking right at Patina, and he goes, why'd you tase him? And Patina goes, he turned. And like,
Yeah, that's sort of the question I have,
I'm
especially
like,
if the
what?
guy's saying you weren't even charged. Well, why were they chasing you?
So anyway, that I ended up getting an attorney. We litigated through the case, and I essentially, because I don't want to go to trial. I already have a bunch of panic and anxiety about it. I don't think that the female employees or the police officer, I don't think that they're going to tell the truth. I think that they're going to exaggerate the factual narrative to make it look like, I'm this monster that needed to be, the community needed to be protected from. So I didn't want to risk having to listen to the employees and the police be disingenuous in their testimony, because that could potentially lead to me being volatile in the courtroom. And I'm like, hey, and then they offered me, my lawyer negotiated a decent deal. He said, hey, if you plead no contest to the obstructing charge, they will dismiss the disorderly conduct and this other speeding ticket that you have, and they will preserve your right to appeal the court's denial of your motion to dismiss for lack of probable cause, just for the obstructing. So it seemed like a decent deal. I'm not
What
too...
can you clarify? Can you clarify what the obstructing charge
Mhm.
was?
Yeah,
Like,
I'm
obstructing
curious
what?
on that too.
Yeah, here, I got the probable cause affidavit right here. It's um Sergeant Brinka, Officer Patina, and I ran after him. Officer Patina gave Jason commands to stop running. Jason failed to do so. Here I found probable cause to charge Jason with obstructing a peace officer, right? So that's first. Then in the next paragraph, this is again another after the fact situation. He said, I later spoke to mall security guard Nicholas Scott. Nicholas informed me that he confronted Jason outside of Zoomies. Jason began to yell at him and was using profanities. Nicholas said Jason was making a scene and it was disturbing the peace of shoppers at the mall. Here I found probable cause to charge Jason with disorderly conduct. So a better way for the officer to have done this would have been to put that paragraph before the obstructing paragraph. Obstructing is always like a secondary charge,
Right.
not a
But either way,
primary charge.
like that, like he wrote it in the chronology of it. So like they
Well, he
detained you.
right there, he evidences the illegal principle of bootstrapping probable cause. In order to better substantiate the obstructing charge, he went back into the mall to elicit
Yeah.
more information so that they could charge me with disorderly conduct.
Okay. Could you also speak to, because the thing that had came up in your prior cases we just talked about was that note from dispatch. Can you speak to how that came up in this case too?
So when I got the discovery, like I said, I had filed a petition with the district court to get confidential criminal justice information. When I found out about that note, I filed a petition against the city of Great Falls, and ironically, the secretary that responded to my request is the secretary who used to be a dispatcher, who was the same dispatcher who wrote the note about the shooting. Yeah, her name's Rebecca Schultz. So back in 2019, she was a dispatcher. She cherry picked that phone call that I had with her to make me appear like I was threatening cops. And fast forward here to 2024, I file a petition for the district court to give me confidential criminal justice information, or I initially file a public records request with the city of Great Falls. And guess who the secretary is who denies the request, asserting that it's confidential criminal justice information? Rebecca Schultz. Interesting. So I filed a petition in district court to get this information, and I noticed when I got my discovery, they decided to give me the dispatch log with that note from 2019. Yeah, right here. It was from I don't know if they retyped it again. It looks like they
So
retype things sometimes.
when what you're saying is, so you, in terms of getting the discovery for this case at the mall, part of that discovery was this note included in there?
Yep.
Okay. So how did that come up? Like why is that in your discovery?
I am not sure why, but I think because I had that petition filed with the district court, the city knew about it, and I think just to kind of like limit their responsibility in giving me that information, if the district court ends up ruling in my favor, they would just give me a part of what I've requested in this criminal misdemeanor case discovery. That makes
So
any
Officer
sense.
Patina and whoever the other officer was, they didn't know or use that at all in terms of the reason to arrest you.
Officer Patina did. So when Officer Patina also wrote a narrative, but that wasn't part. His narrative wasn't part of the probable cause affidavit, but he obviously has to write a report about what he knew and tasing me. And I think I told you before, the last paragraph in his narrative, like right here, I chased the male into the east parking lot of the mall. I yelled multiple times for him to stop running. He refused. We were between some vehicles and he stopped, turned to face me. I quickly drew my taser and I tased him. The male fell to the ground. I advised him he was under arrest. I gave him commands to place his hands behind his back, and he started to comply. I called for medical to respond to give aid to the male. He had a small cut above his eye from where he fell to the ground. The male was complaining that he did not feel well and needed to go to the hospital. I removed the taser prongs from the male. I gave him a pat search to check for weapons. I did not find any. I found a wallet with a Montana identification card. The male was identified as Jason Martin. And then here's the last paragraph. I was informed Jason had multiple officer caution alerts and is a registered violent offender. The alerts included shooting police officers. I observed from my interaction with Jason that he was very hostile. So again, here's another after the fact situation where he's trying to use things that he learned of after the fact to justify tasing me earlier. And if you notice,
so that was in the yeah, go ahead.
And if you notice, yeah, that was in the report for this obstructing case. And if you notice, these are both factually erroneous. It means they're false. It says he is a registered violent offender. So I'm not a registered violent offender. I finished that requirement months ago. Well, actually, a while ago. And it said the alerts included shooting police officers. Okay.
Yeah.
I've never shot a police officer, but I bet I can guess where he got that exaggeration from.
Right. So sort of to like in summary, and I think in our first conversation you described it as like a game of telephone. Like it started off as a dispatch note in 2019 after you had said, I could have shot them if I had a firearm or something along those lines. Like you didn't have a firearm. You weren't saying that you wanted to shoot them. You were
And
just
only
laying out
because I didn't, and only because I didn't know who they were.
Right, exactly, because they didn't announce you. So then it started there, and then it had evolved into you would shoot at police officers, and now it's escalated even further in this last instant where you have shot at police officers.
Yes.
So just an
Yes.
interesting way that has progressed as just a simple alert or a simple note, which, I mean, after following many other cases, you know that they're putting notes in and alerts for all sorts of people, and you kind of wonder how much of it is based off of facts, or how much do they overinterpret those alerts?
Yeah, and they're definitely more willing to do it with somebody like me, like who was a registered violent offender. What I've noticed is when you get that kind of label in Montana or anywhere, people start to treat you subhuman. So even if they make an error about facts, they almost treat you as if you deserve to be erroneously labeled. Like you deserve it.
Yeah, and just to kind of bring this full circle too, like we were talking about the case with Jane, was her name, was over a sandwich. I mean,
Jenna,
all of this
yeah.
is because Jenna, yeah. But all of this, or so many of the threads go back to that initial incident in like 2012 or so, where you threw a beer can or beer bottle at someone or at law enforcement, like something that is, I don't know, probably not at the top of what I would describe as being someone who's a violent offender.
No. And the beer can incident, like that was provocated by aggression towards me. I wasn't the initial aggressor. A 400-pound guy who was an assistant football coach violently slammed me into, a door, and then I responded in kind by throwing a can of beer at him. So it wasn't like a malicious action, like I was just angry
Right.
and decided to violently hit somebody. Like I got assaulted first.
Well, and I think that just speaks well to how even the smallest things can impact a lot of your life, and not really as because you have much control over it, but how narratives take shape totally outside of your control.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing, Jason. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover before we sort of wrap this up?
No.
I'm just
I'm glad that you guys have taken your time to like look into these things and get some awareness out there, because rural areas like this, like they don't get the coverage they've needed. Like, these incidences are, you know, they don't occur the way that they do here without accountability in
Yeah.
other places, like in bigger cities. Like, officers have to wear body cameras. There's a lot more liability. People are constantly getting paid out for excessive use of force claims.
Mm-hmm.
And none of that's happening in Montana because of the rural community that we're in. And there's this false sense of like Montana's like, beyond reproach. This good old
Mm-hmm.
Montana, good old boy network. We don't do anything wrong here, and when we do, we're not going to pay for it anyway.
Right.
You know,
Well, and to your point earlier about some of these people, or a good number of these people, are in low socioeconomic groups, so they either don't have the money or the know-how to fight in this legal system that's inherently biased towards them.
yeah.
Yeah.
Kevin, got any questions? Any other final thoughts?
No. Thanks for sharing. It's really important that we get this out, and it takes courage for people to come out and tell their story, because they know that you're going to be judged. You're going to be looked
Yeah.
under a microscope, and when you pull these things out, and it revisits a lot of things and rehashes a lot of things. So, thanks for coming out and telling us your story, and we definitely wish you the best, and we're going to see where it goes, see what happens.
Yeah. Thank you for interviewing me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thanks, Jason. Okay, you can end.
Okay.